You ever walk into a room and immediately know you don't belong there? Not because anyone said it out loud, just because of the way the air changes. The way eyes slide past you like you're a smudge on the wall. Like you're already invisible before you've said a word. That's what happened to Lev Okafor the first time he walked into Ridgecrest Capital Partners. But nobody in that building knew who Lev Okafor was, and that was exactly the way he wanted it. Ridgecrest Capital Partners occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Calgary, Alberta. The kind of building where the lobby had a waterfall feature and a full-time concierge and a cafe that charged $9 for a drip coffee. The kind of place where receptionists wore blazers and the elevators required a key card to operate. The parking garage alone had valet service. Lev Okafor arrived at 7:48 on a Tuesday morning in February, wearing a pair of worn Carhartt work pants and a faded green parka with a tear in the left sleeve. He was 34 years old, a quiet-faced black man with close-cut hair and calloused hands, and a way of standing very still that people tended to misread as uncertainty. He carried a thermos of coffee he'd made at home and a small cloth bag with his cleaning supplies. He was there through a contract with Everclean Building Services, $18.50 an hour, no benefits, mornings only, Monday through Friday. He took the service elevator. The main cleaning crew had already finished the overnight shift, but Everclean had assigned Lev the specialty task, the executive floor. Floor 38, the kitchen, the boardroom, the private offices of Ridgecrest's senior partners. These rooms required someone reliable, someone quiet, someone who could move through the space without disturbing anything. The agency had sent Lev because in 3 years with Everclean, he had never once broken anything, lost anything, or caused a single complaint. What they didn't put in his file, because nobody at Everclean knew to ask, was this. Before he picked up a mop, Lev Okafor had spent 8 years building and exiting 2 companies. The first was a logistics software firm he co-founded at 22 in Edmonton, sold at 26 for $14 million. The second was a supply chain consultancy he grew to 40 employees before selling a majority stake to a Toronto-based private equity group at 31. He had been featured in Alberta Venture magazine, spoken at 2 national business conferences, and sat on the board of a registered nonprofit that provided startup training to Indigenous youth in rural Alberta. He had stopped all of it because his younger sister, Celeste, had been diagnosed with early-onset multiple sclerosis at 29. She had no savings, no partner, 2 kids under 8, and a mortgage she couldn't carry alone. Lev sold his condo in Beltline. He moved into the basement suite of her house in Forest Lawn and took the first job that left his days flexible enough to drive her to appointments. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't post about it. He just showed up. Some nights, after Celeste was asleep and the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, Lev sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about the companies he used to run. Not with regret, just with the clear-eyed understanding that he had chosen the more important thing. The morning staff at Ridgecrest barely registered his presence. That was fine with him. He wiped down counters, restocked off the coffee station, cleaned the glass panels of the boardroom with a chamois cloth. He worked efficiently, methodically, and without a sound. The first person to notice him in a way that wasn't polite and forgettable was Dawson Mercer. Dawson Mercer was 41, a white man with the kind of permanent tan that came from ski trips rather than outdoor labor, and the confident posture of someone who had never once doubted that he deserved to be in whatever room he was in. He was a senior managing director at Ridgecrest, meaning he managed roughly $800 million in client assets and wore bespoke suits and had his own full-time assistant. He was also the kind of man who had never learned to tell the difference between authority and entitlement, because for most of his life, those 2 things had looked identical. The first incident was small. Lev was restocking the kitchen on a Thursday morning when Dawson walked in without looking up from his phone. "Coffee's out," Dawson said, not to Lev specifically, just into the air. An announcement to whoever was supposed to handle that. "Just put a fresh pot on," Lev said. Should be ready in about 2 minutes. Dawson looked up then. He took in the Carhartt pants, the worn parka hanging on a hook by the door, the supply bag on the counter. Something in his expression recalibrated. Right, he said. Then he stood there for a moment, watching Lev move around the kitchen, before adding, "While you're at it, the boardroom needs the table wiped down again. Someone left fingerprints on the far end." "I'll get to it." Dawson poured his coffee and left. He did not say thank you. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, something had shifted. Dawson had started treating Lev less like a background presence and more like a utility. He left sticky notes on the kitchen counter with tasks written on them, not requests, just lists. Fridge needs cleaning. Recycling overflowing. Wipe the baseboards in the hallway by my office. Items that were not part of Lev's contract. Items that were, in some cases, not part of anyone's contract. Lev did some of them, the ones that made sense. He left the others. On the second Wednesday, Dawson found him cleaning the boardroom windows and stopped in the doorway. "I left a note about the baseboards," Dawson said. "I saw it. And? That's not in my scope. You'd need to speak to Everclean about that." Dawson stared at him for a long moment. "You know, the last cleaner we had didn't make it complicated." Lev kept working the chamois cloth across the glass. "I don't make it complicated. I do what's in my scope." Dawson left. His jaw was tight. He was not used to being spoken to with that kind of calm, unruffled clarity by someone he had already decided was beneath him. That afternoon, Dawson Mercer walked past the cubicle cluster where 3 junior associates sat doing research and said, loudly enough to carry, "Has anyone else noticed our cleaning person doesn't actually clean?" One of the associates laughed. The other 2 looked at their screens. Lev was in the hallway. He heard it. He picked up his supply bag, moved to the next room, and kept working. 2 weeks in, the nature of the problems escalated. Ridgecrest had a quarterly strategy review coming up, a 2-day closed session with their top 12 institutional clients. The executive floor was being reconfigured to accommodate the meetings. Additional AV equipment brought in, catering stations set up in the breakout rooms, temporary signage installed in the hallways. It was a significant production. Dawson Mercer was the lead host. On the Monday before the review, Dawson called the Everclean office directly. He spoke to Lev's supervisor, a woman named Cheryl Fontaine, who had managed Everclean's corporate accounts for 11 years. "Your guy on 38, Dawson said. "I need him here earlier, 5:30 instead of 7. And I need him to stay through the afternoon on both review days to handle refreshment turnover. That would involve overtime billing, Mr. Mercer, and it's outside his contracted hours." "I don't care what it involves. Ridgecrest is a significant account for you. Make it happen or we'll find a service that can." Cheryl called Lev that evening. "I know it's not ideal," she said, "but I need you to accommodate this. If we lose Ridgecrest, we lose the whole commercial tower contract." Lev looked at the ceiling for a moment. Celeste was in the next room doing her exercises. He could hear the quiet rhythm of it. "What's the overtime rate?" "Time and a half." "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." He was not agreeable because he was afraid of Dawson Mercer. He was agreeable because Celeste's physiotherapy sessions weren't cheap and the extra hours mattered. The review began on Wednesday. The executive floor was full by 8, clients in expensive coats, catering staff moving quietly through the breakout rooms. Lev arrived at 5:30, as agreed, and worked the setup. He knew where everything was. He moved through the rooms without being asked twice. Mid-morning, during a break between sessions, Dawson pulled him aside in the hallway. He was in a good mood, performing confident host energy for the room around them, and that made him careless with his words. "Hey," Dawson said. "One of the partners spilled coffee on the whiteboard table in room B. Go deal with that. On it. And while you're there, grab the used cups, would you? The caterers are busy." Lev went to room B, cleaned the table, collected the cups. When he came out, Dawson was standing near the catering station with 2 of the institutional clients. A man and a woman, both in their 50s, both with the measured, careful expressions of people who managed very large amounts of other people's money. He was in the middle of a story. He saw Lev pass and gestured toward him without turning, the way you gesture at furniture. Exactly the kind of service operation we run here, Dawson said with a laugh. Even the cleaning staff pitches in when it counts. The woman client glanced at Lev. Her expression was unreadable. Lev walked past. He did not change his pace. He did not look at Dawson. But one of the junior associates near the coffee station, a young South Asian woman named Preeti Nair, first year out of Queen's University, still trying to figure out if this was the kind of firm she wanted to stay at, watched the exchange and felt something land wrong in her stomach. She filed it away. That afternoon, an incident happened that crossed a line nobody could laugh off. Dawson was presenting in the main boardroom, 12 clients at the table, 2 junior associates running the slides. Lev was in the connecting hallway, resetting the breakout room for the afternoon session. The hallway was quiet. One of the catering staff had left a cart of glassware near the boardroom door, slightly in the way. Lev moved it carefully. The boardroom door opened, unexpectedly, during what should have been a closed session. Dawson was coming out, irritated about something. He saw Lev with the cart. "Why is that out here?" Dawson said. Not a question, a performance. He turned to the open door behind him, made sure the clients inside could hear. "Can someone explain to me why there's a cleaning cart blocking the entrance to my presentation?" "I was moving it," Lev said. "It was left by catering. I don't care where it was left. This is a client-facing space. It looks like a stockroom." Lev said nothing. He pushed the cart further down the hallway, and next time, Dawson added, louder, "Use the back hall. That's what it's there for." He went back inside. The door closed. Preeti Nair, sitting at the far end of the room, watched Dawson return to his place at the head of the table, smoothing his jacket, reclaiming his presentation voice like nothing had happened. She looked down at the table. She took out her phone under the edge of the table and opened her notes app. She started writing down dates. That night, Lev drove home through a gray February slush. He picked up groceries on the way. He made dinner. He helped his niece with a math worksheet while Celeste rested. He didn't say anything to anyone about Dawson Mercer because there was nothing to say that would change the math of his situation. Not yet. He called his former business partner, a man named Fred Bolak, who now ran an advisory firm out of Vancouver. They talked twice a month. They had built things together. Fred was the only person outside of family who knew the full picture of Lev's life right now. "Still cleaning floors?" Fred said. Not unkind. Just direct. "Still cleaning floors." "And the guy?" Long pause. Lev had mentioned Dawson in their last call, briefly. "He's getting worse." "How bad?" "Bad enough that I'm starting to wonder how long I can keep this quiet." Fred went silent for a moment. Then, "You remember what you told me when we were building the first company? When that investor kept calling you the wrong name in meetings, even after you corrected him 4 times. I told you that my work was going to do the talking eventually, right? And it did." "This is different, Fred." "Is it?" Lev didn't answer. He hung up not long after and sat in his car in the driveway for a while, looking at the light in Celeste's bedroom window. The following Tuesday, Dawson Mercer did something that changed everything. He was in a meeting with Ridgecrest's managing partner, a sharp, reserved woman named Constance Devereaux, who had built the firm over 22 years and was not known for tolerating excess of any kind. The meeting was routine, a monthly check-in. Dawson used it, as he sometimes did, to surface things that made him look like a careful steward of the firm's culture. "One thing I wanted to flag," Dawson said. "The cleaning vendor. Everclean. I've had some concerns about the performance of the contractor on 38. Constance looked up from her notepad. "What kind of concerns?" "Attitude, mostly. He's been resistant to reasonable requests. There was an incident during the quarterly review, in front of clients." He paused. "I just want to make sure we're getting what we're paying for." Constance wrote something down. "Send me the specifics. I'll have operations follow up." What Dawson didn't know. Constance Devereaux had been in that boardroom hallway when Dawson dressed Lev down in front of the open door. She had seen it from the other direction, coming from the restroom. She hadn't said anything at the time. She was not an impulsive woman. But she had seen it, and she remembered it differently than Dawson remembered it. She called operations. She also quietly asked Preeti Nair to come into her office. Preeti sat across from Constance and opened her notes app. She had 7 entries, dates, incidents, exact words where she could remember them, the sticky notes with unlisted tasks, the comment in front of junior staff, the cart incident during the review. She spoke carefully and without embellishment. Constance listened to all of it without expression. "Thank you," she said when Preeti finished. "This stays between us for now." Then Constance did something Dawson had no way of anticipating. She called Everclean directly, not to complain, but to ask a simple administrative question. She wanted to confirm the contracted scope for the Floor 38 assignment, because she had reason to believe it had been expanded without proper authorization. Cheryl Fontaine walked her through the original contract. Then, at Constance's gentle prompting, Cheryl mentioned the overtime call. The request for early starts, the pressure applied. Cheryl did not name it as pressure in those words, but Constance was 22 years in finance. She knew pressure when she heard it described. She thanked Cheryl and hung up. Then she did one more thing. Her assistant had flagged an upcoming event, the Alberta Founders Forum, a private gathering of 60 of the province's most significant business figures, held every spring at a lodge north of Banff. Ridgecrest sponsored it annually. The guest list for this year's forum had just been confirmed. Lev Okafor's name was on it, not as a guest of Ridgecrest, as a keynote speaker. The forum's organizing committee had reached out to Lev months ago, before he'd taken the Everclean job. He had said yes. He'd told them his situation, asked if they'd still want him, and they'd said yes without hesitation. The forum existed, in part, to surface exactly those kinds of stories. Constance stared at the name on the list for a long moment. Lev Okafor. Fletcher Street address in Forest Lawn. Currently contracted through Everclean Building Services. She went very still. Then she picked up the phone. The call Lev received came on a Friday afternoon, while he was wiping down the glass partition near the elevator bank on 38. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't recognize the number, but it was a Calgary exchange, so he stepped away and answered, "Mr. Okafor, this is Constance Devereaux. I'm the managing partner at Ridgecrest Capital Partners." Lev went very still. "I understand you're the contractor Everclean has assigned to our executive floor," she said. "That's right." A pause. "I'd like to meet with you, not as a vendor, as a person. I've done some reading on your background. I think there are things we should discuss." Lev looked down the hallway. Dawson Mercer's office door was closed. Voices behind it, muffled. "When?" Lev said. "Monday morning, my office. 7 a.m. before the floor opens." He said yes. He didn't tell anyone. Not Fred. Not Celeste. He drove home, made dinner, helped with homework, and went to sleep like it was any other Friday. That Monday, Lev arrived at 7 in his usual Carhartt and parka. He did not dress up. He had nothing to prove with clothing. Constance Devereaux met him at the elevator herself, which was not a small gesture from a woman whose time was carefully allocated. She was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with the direct, unornamented manner of someone who had long since stopped performing anything. She shook his hand. She showed him into her corner office and closed the door. On the table between them, she had placed 2 things: a printed copy of his Alberta Venture magazine feature from 3 years ago, and the forum program with his name listed as keynote speaker. "I want to apologize," she said, "on behalf of this firm, for what you've experienced in this building." Lev looked at the papers, then at her. "I also want to know," she said, "why." So he told her. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Celeste's diagnosis, the choice he made, the math of it, her appointments, the kids, the timing of care, the way a flexible contract at 18.15 an hour was in its own way exactly what the situation required. Constance listened without once reaching for her phone. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'd like to offer you a consulting engagement. 3 months to start." advising our impact investment team on founder assessment. The work you've done building and exiting early-stage companies in Alberta is more directly relevant to what we do than most of my senior staff would be comfortable admitting. She named a number. Lev looked out the window at the Calgary skyline. The hours, he said. I have flexible. We can build the schedule around what you need. Cheryl at Everclean has already said she'd release the contract if a better opportunity came through. I called her Friday. Lev looked at her. You called Everclean on Friday. I did. Something that had been held very tight in his chest for months shifted, barely perceptibly, just a fraction of an inch. Okay, he said. I'll consider it. That's all I'm asking. He stood. She walked him to the elevator and pressed the button. More thing, Constance said. Dawson Mercer has been placed on a performance review. There will be a formal process. I wanted you to know that before you heard it from anyone else. Lev nodded once. What he said to you in that hallway, she added. In front of clients. That's not who we are, or it's not who we're supposed to be. She paused. We'll do better. The elevator doors opened. Lev stepped in. He rode down to the lobby alone. He walked out through the front door. Not the service entrance. The front door. He sat in his truck for a while. He didn't call anyone. He just sat there looking at the glass tower, thinking about the way Constance Devereaux had said we'll do better. Not as a performance, not for an audience, but quietly to one person who had every reason not to believe it. He believed it anyway. The Alberta Founders Forum was held in late April at a lodge 40 minutes north of Banff. 60 people in a room full of exposed timber and mountain light. People who ran things, built things, had lost things, and started again. Lev stood at the front of the room in a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. He had no slides. He didn't use notes. He talked about his sister. He talked about Forest Lawn. He talked about getting into service elevators every morning, and what it felt like to carry something true about yourself in a space that had already decided you were nobody. He talked about the choice between protecting your own dignity in the moment and protecting something more important in the long run. He did not name Dawson Mercer. He talked about what it meant to have a Constance Devereaux in a building, someone who looked, who listened, who acted. He said those people existed in every industry, in every organization, and the work was to find them and to be them. He was speaking for 22 minutes. When he stopped, the room was so quiet that he could hear the wind off the mountains pressing against the glass. Then someone started clapping, and within 3 seconds the entire room was on their feet. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't hold up a trophy. He just nodded once and thanked them. He flew home that evening on a regional carrier with a middle seat and no legroom. He took a cab from the airport. He walked in the front door of Celeste House at 10:30, and she was still awake on the couch with a cup of tea, watching something on her laptop. She looked up at him. How'd it go? She said. Good, he said. It went good. He sat down next to her, and she leaned against his shoulder, and they watched her show until she fell asleep. That was the whole of the celebration. The fallout when it came was quiet and complete. Dawson Mercer's performance review concluded in May. 3 separate staff members, including Preethi Nair, provided documented accounts. The pattern they described wasn't limited to Lev. It went back further, to a trainer who had left the firm after 8 months and a junior associate who had transferred to another team and never said publicly why. The HR process took 6 weeks. Dawson retained a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the documentation, the recorded overtime call, Preethi's notes, Constance's own account, and advised his client, quietly, to accept a negotiated separation. Dawson Mercer left Ridgecrest Capital Partners on a Friday afternoon in June. No announcement was made on LinkedIn. His bio disappeared from the firm's website over the weekend. Everclean Building Services received a letter from Ridgecrest's operations team that month, citing Ridgecrest's decision to review vendor relationships where client-facing staff had been subjected to inappropriate treatment. It was not punitive. It was, in Constance's own careful language, a commitment to alignment of values. Everclean used it, with permission, as a case study in their staff training program. Cheryl Fontaine kept a copy of the letter in her desk. Preeti Nair was offered a mentorship pairing with an external advisor as part of Ridgecrest's junior staff development program. The advisor was Lev Okafor. She said yes without hesitating. At their first session, over coffee in a cafe on Stephen Avenue, she asked him the question she'd been holding since the cart incident in the hallway. "How did you not react?" she said. "When he talked to you like that, in front of everyone, how did you just walk away?" Lev thought about it. Because reacting was what he wanted, Lev said. If I reacted, the story became about me. My reaction. My anger. And that was a story he already had a narrative for. Preeti nodded slowly. "So you let it be his story," she said. "I let it be exactly what it was, and then I let time do the work." She looked down at her coffee. "I should have said something sooner," she said, "when I saw it happening." "You said something when it mattered most," he said. "That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing." The Fletcher Foundation, named after Lev's sister's family name, because it was her steadiness that had made any of this possible, was registered in Alberta in September of that year. Its mandate: startup education and mentorship for youth in underserved communities across the prairie provinces, with a specific focus on young people who had been told by their circumstances that entrepreneurship was not for them. The first cohort of 18 young people, ages 16 to 24, went through the program that winter in a church basement in Forest Lawn. They learned how to read a balance sheet, how to pitch an idea, how to fail at something without deciding that the failure was about them. Lev ran 2 sessions a week. He drove himself. He bought the coffee. One of the participants, a 17-year-old kid named Abdi, who had come alone and sat in the back for the first 3 sessions without speaking, built a mobile phone repair business that generated $3,400 in revenue in its first 4 months of operation. At the final session, Abdi shook Lev's hand and said, "I didn't think someone like me could do something like this." Lev looked at him for a moment. "That's exactly why we're here," he said. Word of the foundation spread through Alberta's business community through the spring. 3 corporate donors signed on before the end of the year. A second city was added to the program rollout. A national newspaper ran a half-page feature that focused, without sentimentality, on the 3 years Lev had spent in a service elevator and what he'd built from the other side of it. Dawson Mercer read the article. No one knew what he thought about it because no one who knew Lev spoke to Dawson anymore, and Dawson had not spoken publicly since his name disappeared from Ridgecrest's website. Some chapters close, without a sound. Lev Okafor was invited back to the Alberta Founders Forum the following spring, not as a keynote, as a co-chair of the planning committee. He accepted. He still drove a truck with a cracked windshield. He kept meaning to fix it. He just hadn't gotten around to it yet. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, because something about this story has been sitting with me since I first came across it. We live in a world that is very good at reading surfaces: job title, clothing, the neighborhood you live in, the car you drive or don't drive. We make decisions about people in 3 seconds, sometimes less, and we call it intuition. We call it reading a room. We call it knowing who belongs and who doesn't. What Lev Okafor's story asks is a harder question. Not who belongs, but who decides. Who gave anyone the right to look at a man in worn work pants carrying a supply bag and conclude that they already knew his whole story? Nobody does that consciously. That's what makes it so dangerous. We don't announce our assumptions. We just act on them, and the accumulation of those actions becomes the wall that someone else has to spend years quietly dismantling. The people who matter in a story like this are not just the Lev Okafors of the world. They are the Preeti Nairs, the people who see something wrong happening and write it down even when they are young and uncertain and have a lot to lose. They are the Constance Devereaux, the people with power who use it to look harder at the thing they almost didn't notice. Because Lev could not have done this alone. Nobody does it alone. The whole point is that dignity, real dignity, is something a community builds together or it doesn't get built at all. If this story made you think of a time you were underestimated, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you were carrying that nobody could see. Tell me who showed up when it counted. If someone in your life is being looked through right now, share this video with them, just so they know someone's looking. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit that bell. This channel exists for exactly these stories, the ones where quiet people carry enormous things, and the world eventually catches up to what they always knew. Here's what I'll leave you with. The service elevator exists in every building, every industry, every room where someone has already decided before you arrived who is allowed to matter and who is allowed to be useful and nothing more. And the answer to that elevator is not to rage against it, not to perform your credentials at people who wouldn't listen anyway. The answer is to keep building, keep showing up, keep being exactly, precisely, fully who you are. Your moment will come, and when it does, it won't be loud. It'll just be true. That's enough. That's always been enough.